It's a day of celebration, right?
Absolutely,
Because
without a doubt.
we have another new series that's come out today, which you're sure to love. And yeah, so it's
And as you see, we've
glass of
ended up
wine.
in the 50s.
Ended up in the 40s to begin with, and then into
Yeah,
the
but
50s.
but we are in the 50s.
We are in the 50s in this Deinhard. Sparty, why don't you tell them what the new series is, in case they don't know?
So if you haven't caught it already, it's War to War, and what we're doing is that we're going from 1945 to 1957. It's the first season of our Cold War coverage that we will continue doing for quite some time. After that, we'll do the space race. But right now, we're doing this part. I'm not going to spoil why we're doing this, but I'm going to say this much. In the next couple of days, the actual list of episodes is going to be published. A full list of episodes,
which is pretty cool,
is going to be published on Patreon and on our website for our TimeGhost Army members. But it's only for the TimeGhost Army members. So, yeah.
So it's exclusive.
It's exclusive.
Wow. Okay. Well, the thing about live streams is people write in questions and ask us questions. So any questions you have, you can ask them to us. And Clara, say hi, Clara. Hi. You don't just you could say it. You don't have to get on camera. We're afraid of you on camera. Clara, she's new with us. She's been with us for about a month and a half, something like that.
No, for 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
Okay. Oh, the last shooting was 3 weeks ago. Yeah. Oh. I mean, gosh darn, that feels like many weeks ago. Okay. Well, she's great having us with she directed an episode today, the last episode of the Bismarck series. What else is going on with us? Let's see. Korea is now in 1951, and everybody is failing at the moment.
Yes.
Really, this in early February. That's going to change. You should definitely watch the Korea episodes in February and early March. It's a real shift to the entire dynamic of the war, and a real shift to the way the world actually sees the war. So there's that. On the World War II channel, the rise of Hitler is nearly in 1931, right?
It is.
Yeah,
we're getting close. December is the next episode we shoot. We shoot that tomorrow, right?
We shoot that tomorrow. Yeah, we shoot that tomorrow.
Then we're in 1931, and the closer we get to 1932, the scarier it gets.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what you mean.
No, I'm just saying the scarier it gets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have anything from any of our lovely people out there?
We have some questions on Patreon.
Okay.
And the first one is from Ralph Runziger.
Ralph Runziger?
And
it's a made-up name. Really?
No,
Ralph Runziger?
German.
Next time I get a fake ID, I'm going to be Ralph Runziger.
He says, hello, TimeGhost team. Very excited about your live stream. I have a few questions about the Korean War series.
Okay.
It seems to me that Indy quotes a lot of Western and some Chinese sources, but not so many Korean ones. Is there a lack of objective material from Korean people?
Well, I don't quote any Chinese sources either. I quote Western sources because that's what there is. Particularly, we are fortunate that the Western sources, whether they're what?
We're unlisted.
What? Okay, I have to change it.
We're unlisted.
Okay.
Do you want to change that?
I don't know how to change that from here. But Jake or Tom can change it.
Okay, we'll talk to them. I can keep talking.
Yeah.
No, we use a variety of Western sources, of 20 or 30 at this point, and they are warts and all. They talk about when the soldiers not only do good things or heroic things, when they run away, when they fail, the crisis within UN command and within American command and stuff. You don't have anything like that from any North Korean or Chinese sources. There are no North Korean sources that I know of at all. I mean, anybody that wrote something like that in the 1950s, well, they would have disappeared, and so would their family and all of their friends. So that's, yeah, I mean, it was hard enough in World War II finding reliable Chinese sources. I did one episode, I think it was October something, 1940, when I told something that happened in China about during one of the communist offensives. And it was the nationalist viewpoint, the communist viewpoint, and the Japanese viewpoint. And I told all three versions because they were three completely different things. They didn't even agree on who actually won the battle, let alone what the casualties were and things like that. And I told that to illustrate the hardship it is finding reliable sources for this period of history from that part of the world. I did get some drier Chinese sources later in the war, but they didn't have any. They were just deployment, armies, and places. There were no color, no no personal stories or anything like that. We don't have anything like that from the Korean perspective. We don't. So.
I mean, if you think about it, it's not actually that odd. We all know what's going on in North Korea. The borders are closed. They're not communicating with anybody except the Chinese, and specifically, we don't have any free historians working from that perspective. And the Chinese sources, as Indy was saying, are highly unreliable or not even possible to get. I experienced exactly the same thing with Between Two Wars, and actually, I had a discussion with a historian, an academic historian, another academic historian, a few days ago, and he was talking about maybe he wanted to go into specifically sinology and Chinese history. And I said, please do as quickly as you can. Christoph Mauch as well is dealing, of course, a little bit with Chinese history, but more from the environmental perspective. But it's very, very difficult, because even if you do get into China and you do research in China, you're going to be monitored and it's going to be controlled. There's no way of getting an objective story out of there.
And beyond that, even if you actually interview someone who fought in the war and put something like that, we got a comment a couple of weeks ago. Somebody objected to in excuse me, I got very dry throat today. Oh, here's your coat. And we quoted an interview Max Hastings did with a guy who fought with the Chinese army in the war. An interview with him, and the guy wrote in that he was upset that we had even that. It says, it wasn't corroborated from a variety of sources. Where was this guy's deployment, his service record? I don't have any of those things. So if people are going to complain, even when we have an interview with someone, a very rare interview with someone who actually fought there, I don't know what to do. There's no more information. The best I can hope for is to talk to people that were actually there and hopefully rely as best we can on their memories.
The next question is from Harold Schultz, also from Patreon. He asks, can you talk about the medical advances in battlefield treatment in Korea compared to World War II?
Well, so far, we don't really have much, as far as I know. And in the first, say, 6 or 7 months of the war, I don't think I'm missing something. Oh, well, definitely. I mean, you have things like the MASH units. You are much more mobile, right? And we have the helicopters and stuff. So I suppose it's easier to evacuate people, or easier to bring personnel in to treat people that need treating. I
can answer this a little bit.
Okay.
You have to think of how medical advances work. Medical advances don't happen like on the day that you need them. They happen before that. So what we see with Korea is that a lot of the things that were learned during World War II now benefit the soldiers in Korea, because that's about the level that 4 or 5 years is what you need to catch up with surgical advances anyway. So one of the things that, for instance, was a big difference between Korea and World War II is open heart surgery.
No.
Open heart surgery, for the first time in human history, happened during World War II. And
No, it happened lots before, just nobody survived.
Okay, fine. Yeah, you're right. They tried, but it was actually in the medical community. It was it wasn't even the Holy Grail. It was the forbidden zone. It was, you don't go there. You don't open the heart because people die.
Yeah.
And I don't remember his name now. I should, but it was an American physician in England who decided that can't be the case, because he was sick and tired of seeing soldiers coming in with shrapnel right next to their heart and dying because nobody dared operate on them. And he got a number of pigs, because our anatomy is very similar.
Why did he work with the police? Oh, sorry, I couldn't help it. Hey, we're a little crazy here.
And the results was mixed. Several of the pigs died. Many of the pigs died, actually. Most of the pigs died, to be honest. But by doing that, he dared open the heart and start messing around with it. And as a result, well, that fixed the problem. He saved the first time somebody was saved in open heart surgery was when he had completed his
Several
test.
pigs were saved.
Yeah, several humans, actually.
Yeah, but the pigs first.
I think it was 4 humans were saved
Okay.
Shortly after the American invasion. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, this is our third question from Patreon.
Okay.
Mathieu Wendling from Patreon is asking, will there be a special about how the Peace Treaty of Paris ending World War II for European Axis except Germany happened?
Well,
That's interesting.
that's an interesting one. Yes, we will cover that
Yeah,
in
but
War to
I'm
War.
not certain. Yeah,
But
it's not going to be covered on the World War II channel, though.
definitely not. It's going to be covered. We're on the TimeGhost channel now, my friend.
Yes.
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 So it's going to be covered in War to War. This is a little bit of a complicated question, though, because there's not just one peace treaty that ends World War II. It's a whole mess of treaties that go on all the way into the 1990s. So we're not going to get to the point of where the peace for World War II has been concluded. That was only concluded after the fall of the Soviet Union. So it's yeah. And actually, Andorra is still technically at war with some people.
Andorra is still technically at war with everyone.
I know.
Anyone out there from Andorra? Hey, we're at war with you. No, we're at one with you. Sorry, I get those confused. All right.
Okay, one more question from Patreon from Ovidi. On the Cold America podcast, you stated that you have an idea of how a 100 Years War series could be done. Is this still on the table? I would love to see it.
It's not off the table. We're set for the next 3 or 4 years. I have a plan, which I'm not going to tell you guys, for a magnum opus. But I'm 57 now, right? When I'm 60, I would like to start this particular plan. It takes exactly 10 years to do. This would be like, I think, the greatest thing. And he'd be involved too, of course. And obviously Clara would be involved. And this lamp over here would be involved too. It's been in everything else. So, but it's a 10-year series. But it's not the 100 Years War. The way we were thinking of how we could do the 100 Years War is to have it. You could do, it's 113 years it actually lasted, something like that, right? And we were going to have it either like spring, summer, autumn, winter. So like 4 episodes per year. That would take 10 years to cover like that. But you could do it like 2 episodes per year, and then you'd be outside of Europe because you'd be able to cover the rest of the world too during that period. And there's a lot of great history. That's a great project, and it would be really fun to do. But it's not on the cards right now.
There's also the huge challenge of actually, like, the simple fact is that we don't have any film or photos from that great conflict.
5-10 years from now, we have AI that can make it.
Perhaps.
So,
and that, but
with coins, we can just make people look like they look on their coins.
Yes, I know. There's even very little art preserved from this period, so
So
you're
the answer
light.
is not right now. Is there a problem?
Clara, you're in the light.
There's some static. I'm trying to.
Static. Okay.
Oh, from the phone on the phone. We'll stand there, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Hey, the things that happened during the live stream. Whoa.
Okay, ready for the next question?
Sure.
Yep, born ready.
Guava Guy has a question.
Guava
He
Guy.
asks,
Okay.
what are some of the less known World War II generals that were tactically and strategically brilliant?
Less well known.
Okay, I'm going to just put in a caveat here. The brilliance of single generals is in the case of World War II and actually most wars in the last couple of hundred years, highly overrated. Single generals don't make wars. Wars are done by thousands of people, literally, if not millions in the case of World War II. But even on a level of tactical, strategical decisions, the decisions taken by one general fits into a whole network of generals. So,
and it's not usually at the tactical level anyway. It's at the strategic level.
And
the
so
sorry.
You could put it this way. A brilliant general is a general who knows how to follow the plan and adapt as he goes, because as Clausewitz so famously said, no plan survives contact with the enemy, but does that within a confine where he maintains, or she maintains, the support network that is needed in order to fight a war. And that depends on so many people. So this idea that Patton was a great general, he was a problematic general because he did the opposite of that. And a lot of people suffered and a lot of people died as a result. And the objectives were not reached. A brilliant general like Eisenhower or Marshall, they are much less known to us in like the terms of brilliant generals, because that wasn't their purpose. Their purpose was to gather the whole team of officers, of political officials, of everybody that you need in order to fight a war. So this whole idea about one brilliant general,
Well, it also depends what he's general of. Like, you know, if you don't have a brilliant quartermaster general, or at least a good quartermaster general, you're probably going to lose the war.
absolutely.
Like Eduard Wagner, for all of it, he was on that side, was a great quartermaster.
He was.
You know,
Horrible human being.
Oh yeah, totally. Guaranteed the Germans were able to make war several months longer than they would have been otherwise without without Wagner. So does that make him count? Because I think you're specifically asking for a tactical or strategic level. I think the ones that got famous were the ones that had brilliant strategic victories.
But those victories were not only theirs.
Yeah, but that's the thing. And also, many of those victories came at a significant cost of their own personnel. And a lot of people think a great general is a guy that inflicts a lot of damage on the enemy or takes a lot of territory or whatever the goal is, while preserving as much of his own side, as his own men and material as possible. So, you know.
The purpose of any general is to actually save as many lives as possible on both sides, because killing your enemy also costs not just lives, and it's not just a feel-good thing. It's actually, if you want to be really crass, it's much more beneficial to your side if you wound the soldiers on the other side. But it's also just, there's a net loss. It's very complicated. The purpose of a general is to win a war with as little loss as possible on all sides.
Now, if you can wound them with words, though, yeah?
Well, you know, sticks and stones and all that.
What about them?
Well, they break my bones.
Yes, they do. Words actually hurt you as well. I've used them several times to great effect. Like, you notice, remember earlier today when you compared him to fecal matter, and I didn't object. I didn't object. See, that hurt
That's
him.
a silence.
That
though,
hurt
isn't it?
him.
A non-objection.
I remember last time in the shooting when I was explaining why she walked funny because one of her legs was longer than the other one. That totally hurt her, even though I was making it up. So words can totally hurt you. Sorry, Clara. Let's have a next question.
History Nerd asks, are you all ever going to do a Korean War episode talking about MASH?
We will definitely refer to the MASH units. If specifically the 4077, well, I haven't encountered them yet in any of my sources. As soon as I do, they will definitely be there. I understand there's some great color documentary footage, and there's even a long format. I think there was a war photographer named Robert Altman who had a long format thing about a MASH unit. I'll have to check that out and get back to you. Okay.
Yeah, it was his son who wrote the song, right?
Yeah, I know. 17. He was 17 too,
Yeah.
or maybe even younger.
16.
16.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was listening to that the other day with Anna. It's the first time she heard it.
That's like what you do, father-daughter thing. You listen to the MASH theme. Suicide is painless. You sit there with your daughter and listen to that. Wow. Yeah. See, words do hurt. See? Okay.
Loathing Sam asks,
Loathing Sam.
oh, Loath Sam,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
Why did the American president always sit in the middle when the big three met, even when Stalin was the last original?
Well, there are a number of reasons for this, actually. The first one being that the American president was, as most of you should know, partly paralyzed, and they had to really seat him first, and the other guys came in afterwards, and seating him then on one of the sides would make that complicated. That's number one. Number two, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was actually quite tall, despite his handicap, and Churchill and Stalin were very small.
Yeah, Stalin was a shorty.
Churchill as well. They were both really, really short.
Was Churchill as short as Stalin?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
almost.
Don't write in and ask because I'll tell you. Okay. Yeah, that's true.
This one is from one of our volunteers,
Okay.
Steve Kaufman.
Oh, hey, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, Steve's great.
He
So,
asks, what was one of the biggest challenges to recovery in post-war Europe?
what was one of them?
Ooh.
That all the buildings were knocked down. No. Okay. Let's pick one that's off the beaten path. Let's try to come up with something that's a little off the beaten path. Okay. So everything was knocked down. Restoring a functional national and international train network.
They did that pretty fast.
I
though,
know, but that's
actually,
still, that was
But
a
it was
real
a big
challenge.
That's true. Well, I would say the Cold War was one of the major challenges because it broke up right afterwards and created a whole holy mess. We just have to go to 1949 and look at the Berlin airlift. You think 1949? Yeah, but that's 4 years after the war. When I was a kid, and I was born, 23 years after the war ended. When I was a kid, I could still go around Germany and England and France where I lived, and I would see bombed out buildings. They were still, shells of what they had been. So recovery in Europe took way into the 90s.
No, yeah.
And the Cold War certainly did not help it.
My grandparents, we'd visit them my English grandparents, my mother's from England, my dad's from New York. We'd get to visit them every 3 years or so. We'd go from, Texas to England. And they had a really cool house that they moved into just after the war. Because of course, my mother was born in Egypt in 1940 and evacuated South Africa with grandma. So they never saw England until after the war. They moved into this house, and across the street was a vacant lot because it had been a house, but it had been bombed and it had been destroyed. And even in the 1980s, it was still a vacant lot. They still hadn't built something. And this is a fairly built up suburb, a fairly close suburb of London. So there were many such places.
I know Astrid. She has fond memories. I'm sure her parents didn't think it was so funny. She had fond memories of playing. They play house in a house that was half.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
because
Okay.
It was. They also lived in a very, very newly built, beautiful army brat. I'm not going to say that word, but she in German, British, the British occupation zone. Her father worked with the NATO after the war, and it was a house not far away from their settlement, and it was literally half. So you could see like the bathroom, you could see everything. It was
Wow.
like like a dollhouse, but full size.
Okay.
Parents didn't like that she played there, but she
No, I'm not.
Next question is from Stoke McTavish.
Stoke
And
McTavish.
he asks, what would be the most recent war you'd consider covering?
Well, I'm covering the most recent one. It's 1951. Doing Korea.
I'm in 1945 still. So
Oh, I
no,
won't say that.
seriously, we can answer that in a little bit of serious way. We've talked about this very often, actually. The difference between investigative journalism and historiography is basically that investigative journalists go out and hunt for documents that might not be available to the public, while as historians try to find documents that may have been forgotten or lost, but that are available to the public. So our possibilities of really covering something without totally changing the way we do research means that we need to follow the decades of declassification of public documents. So we start at like 20 years, and anything that's older than 20 years we can sort of cover, but it's really difficult.
I feel uncomfortable covering anything past the 70s, really.
Yeah, it starts getting...
Cuban Missile Crisis was fine. That was fine.
50 years is a really comfortable time to look at because the 50-year declassification level in most countries, even totalitarian countries, means that you have a treasure trove of documents to get to. 50 years is a good time. So to answer the question, the most recent war that we would feel comfortable to cover with that caveat, if we forget about smaller wars and we look at bigger wars, would be the Vietnam War, basically.
Sure, in terms of bigger wars.
That's as far forward as I think we can go. And
that's not my Magnus Opum. My Magnus Opum. That's what I'm going to say from now on. That's not it.
Magnus Opum.
My Magnus Opum.
That's a great name, actually.
Magnus Opum. Hi, I'm glad to meet you. Magnus Opum.
So Vietnam War, that is about the furthest forward. I mean, there are a couple of other simultaneous wars. There's also for instance, the Afghan Revolution and stuff like that happens around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The second or third Arab-Israeli
Biafra
war.
wars would be interesting.
Yeah, there's Yom Kippur. There's a lot of like smaller conflicts, but big conflicts, Vietnam War.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, next question is from P. Biatch. I love you guys and your content. Do you think that MacArthur would have bombed China if he wasn't relieved of command?
No, he wouldn't have been allowed to. I mean, he asked and asked and asked, but it's funny because we're shooting on today's Saturday. We're shooting on Monday. A few Koreas that I've just recently written and things are starting to come to a head between what MacArthur wants and what Truman wants, his vision of the war. The thing is, MacArthur is not interested in Europe. He's interested in his command. But Truman doesn't have the luxury of that. Europe is the main focus for the United States, and the Soviet Union is the main potentially active enemy. And there's some problems there because the US has the bomb, but it doesn't have the army to stop the Soviets. If the Soviets invaded, just marched through Western Europe, without the buildup of NATO, there's no force there that would stop them short of nuclear weapons. And that's World War III, and that's an atomic holocaust. But the rest of the NATO countries and the rest of the UN want the war in Korea to be brought to its conclusion, even if that means a stalemate or stopping at the parallel. MacArthur doesn't want anything short of total victory. He's not going to get permission from anyone else in the American government to bomb China. I don't want to go too much into it because in March and April, I talk a lot about MacArthur and what's going on with him in those last days of him in Tokyo and the damage to his pride. Omar Bradley wrote some scathing commentary about MacArthur that is the conclusion of, I believe, either the March 4th or February 25th episode that you should definitely keep an eye out for. Because I just use Bradley's own words, which is very rare to hear one American general critique another American general like that, especially because they fought, they served together in Europe during World War II. So.
Actually, it's funny that you say that, because we had a question early on, what is the greatest unknown general of World War II? And I said there isn't really such a thing as a single tactical strategic general who's great, because it's a team effort. There is, however, generals that are really bad. And it comes exactly into that. And we're talking about MacArthur right now, but Patton falls into it as well. The ones who don't follow or who do not lead, but just go ahead and do whatever they feel like, that ruins the whole team effort that a war is. And therefore, you could say that there are bad generals, the ones who are not playing the team game.
Well, that's true. And you got by February, especially by March 1951, when, of course, Patton was saying it was impossible to win over the Chinese and the North Koreans without a lot more additional force, a lot more additional money. And then Matt Ridgway takes over 8th Army, and he starts doing exactly what MacArthur said is not possible to do. It was a real hit to MacArthur's pride. But you should watch those when they come out, because I cover it way better than I can just freestyling it here.
The next question is from Trinton. How was information generally being relayed? For example, how would a newspaper, TV, or radio station actually get updates given to them? I assume from the front line in Korea, for example.
Up until the Vietnam War, actually, I'll start a little earlier than that.
I'm assuming they hear the questions she asked, right?
Yeah, but they do
Okay.
at least a little bit, because
I can hear myself.
Okay, cool.
So I'll start a little earlier than that. Before World War II, the only way for a journalist to cover a war was either to get into the war or be in the war as a soldier themselves. So you have Hemingway, for instance, who covered a lot of the Spanish Civil War, and you have a lot of stuff like that. But they were sort of sneaking into the war because there was no such thing as press relations on an official level. That was created during World War II, and it remained a case of journalists being embedded, being official, actual, accredited journalists who were taken into the battle zone together with the soldiers that were going in. And they were, of course, restricted along whatever levels the army that brought them in felt they should be restricted. We've seen that in modern times as well. We've seen it most recently in Gaza, where the IDF did not want to allow journalists to actually cover the war independently. So that's not really something that has completely changed. Korea was exactly the same. There were journalists, they were embedded, there were press relations, they held press meetings, they had press releases and all of that, but it was very organized and very staged. It changed in the next big American war, and that's the Vietnam War, where the situation, first of all, was so chaotic that it was almost impossible to embed journalists in an organized way because guerrilla fighting was very, very difficult situation on the ground. And the second thing is the public opinion in the West, especially in America, had swayed over to we have a right to know and you don't have a right to control what we know. So they opened the floodgates for Vietnam, and the result led to a backlash later on because, of course, as most of you will know, the reaction at home when they saw what was going on the ground was not exactly delight, if I put it that way.
For some it was.
Yeah, but so the situation we live in today is very much a situation which is something in between World War II and Vietnam. That's basically what I would say.
Okay.
Next question is from Andy.
Andy.
Hey guys, wonder if you guys have gained any insights into the mentality of the Axis. It seems strange that they risked their lives for a political agenda that would lead to their deaths if they lost.
But one misunderstanding, that they had different agendae, shall we say. I mean, when people think of the Nazis, they often think in general, like, oh, they just wanted to take over lots of territory. That wasn't it. Like, they had no plans to take over Greece. The main reason to attack Norway was to secure the iron ore supply and take it before the British could interdict that. It wasn't like the Soviet Union, which was the goal. It wasn't just like Hitler was trying to have an empire. Japan specifically was trying to have an empire, the Greater East Asian Prosperity Sphere, with which to have a sort to be the economic king in that, and sort of semi-slaves through that. That economically would have led to ruin had that just been allowed to happen. You could see it was going to lead to ruin after a few years anyway. So I don't think it's really quite fair to say that they knew that their choices in, say, 1939 or 1937 with the Japanese or whatever was victory or death.
But there's also there's a bit of a fallacy in the question, because the question assumes that they had a choice. Now, I'm not by any means here saying that German or Japanese soldiers were not ideologically convinced or willing to die for the cause. Many of them were. But it's not that simple. It's not simple. It's not like you go out in the street one day and say, which ones of you are ready to fight for country and ideology. That's not how it works. It's conscription. I mean, in September 1939 or in August 1939, the vast majority of German people were against a war. They did not want a war. Unfortunately, they had bought into an ideology that meant war. It was inevitable. And once the war happened, well, they were at first maybe hesitant, but when the victories came, they closed rank behind Hitler, and they were very much supportive of the Nazis. And then there's really interesting dynamics that happen after that. One of them comes into play during the bombing war in Europe, and it will come into play in Korea soon. That is the hardening will to defend your country when you are under attack. And when are you under attack? Well, that's a personal perception. So when the RAF started bombing Germany, we know it's very well documented that the will to resist and the support for the Nazis grew, because now
same as the Blitz in England.
Yeah, same as the Blitz in England, same as anywhere in the world, right? Because to a certain degree, to get the people to the level of ideologically supporting a war, there's an amount of gaslighting going on. You are the victim, you are endangered, you are under threat, and all of that. And what happens then to the civilians the moment they actually get attacked by the people that they have been told over and over and over again that they will attack by? Well, they go like, well, there you go.
There you go.
It was true all along. The imperial Jewish-controlled West wants to destroy us. That is a load of hoo-ha, of course, but it doesn't really matter if it's a load of hoo-ha. So you got that. And then, of course, you have truly ideologically determined soldiers that fight for the cause. There were many of them on the Axis side, and they were especially numerous, of course, in Einsatzgruppen and SS and others. And there you get another kind of dynamic. I immediately think of a policeman who was part of the Einsatzgruppen in Ukraine in 1941 and 42, And I quoted him in one of the War Against Humanity episodes. And he wrote a letter home to his wife. And there were two things in that letter that struck me as absolutely terrifying. The first one was how he was deploring that he was killing babies, and how terrible he felt that it was to kill babies. And in the same sentence, he explains why he has to kill babies, because it's for the better of the race. And the next one is if he's willing to die or if he's willing to kill people. And then he starts talking about his own children and the children of his wife, of course, who he's writing to, where his belief, he's wrong, it's terrible, it's absolutely atrocious. But what he believes to the core of his soul is that when he is killing innocent civilians in Ukraine, he's doing it in order to preserve the existence of his children, because he has bought into a mythology of lies, terrible hatred, and other things. So you have this whole scale. Some people didn't want to go to war, but they had to because they were conscripted. Some people maybe wouldn't have gone to war if it wasn't for the fact that they felt that they were under attack. And other people were ideologically convinced that they had to go to war in order to preserve their existence.
And also, if you say the victory or death, you can bring in other countries, the countries that were attacked. For example, the Soviet Union. If you were a Soviet soldier, a lot of the Soviets, it really was victory or death in 1941, early 1942.
You also see the number of volunteers go up in the Soviet Union is a perfect example, but Germany is also an example in 1944-45. The number of people willing to actually not just wait until they're called up, but go out of their way and go out and fight on their own volition increases exponentially the moment the country is literally under attack.
Yeah. Next question is by Peter Palladini.
Peter Palladini.
Beautiful
says,
name.
Love you guys so much.
Love you too, Peter Palladini, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, guess what he plays when he plays Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, I know what he plays.
He's Peter Palladini. Okay.
He is.
Sorry. Any D&D fans out there will get that. Okay.
And I can't explain how much I appreciate you guys. Do you think you'll ever do older wars like Crimea and 7 Years?
Well, our problem with doing wars before the Great War has always been we use footage from, when we did the Great War, we had the deal with what were they called? The British Pathé archive and stuff we use with Screen Ocean or Reuters for World War II in Korea. There's no films of wars before 1900. There's pictures, there's photographs in the 1800s, the second half anyway.
Yeah, first war that was photographed.
But there's photos. We would have to rethink how we would present it. I don't have any ideological objection to doing any of those wars. Crimea would actually be quite interesting, but we wouldn't want to have just 15 minutes of just a talking head and maybe a couple of maps.
And then some like horrible recreation photo. It's very, very difficult. I mean, you have to understand something. Both Indy and I started off in our grown lives, at least, as students of medieval history.
Yep.
And I would love to do stuff about what we studied when we were younger, but there is that difficulty.
So we'd like to, but until you can AI animate old photos to make them into proper films, and it'd be cheating anyway, then I don't see how we can
or to
do it.
use something like a real engine to recreate them without it. It changes the whole format. The format that we do is very much a reporter's format. It's a format that is very similar to television today, to the news on TV.
Sure.
And in order for us to fit into a format like that, we have to rethink everything of how we do it. And to be fair, there are great examples of documentaries that cover older conflicts. They're also a lot costlier than ours. And reinventing that format at the moment with the technological abilities that are at hand is very unlikely.
Okay, next question is by Fiorellino Di Opio. They ask, will you make a special episode on the changes brought by nuclear weapons on the tactics and organization of the US or other armies? Are they present in Korea?
It's funny, when we were starting to do Korea, when I was starting to do the research and writing, Astrid said, we're going to have all these tech episodes like the first couple months to cover all the fabulous advances in technology. You know, the armies have done the advances in technology the 5 years between World War II and Korea. I'm like, no, we're not going to have to do that because we didn't. The bomb was a deterrent. There are plans, operational plans for what the army is supposed to do. You know, in terms, for example, we talked about MacArthur bombing China. If there were bombs on China, MacArthur didn't have any plans for what happened after the bombs. Like what would happen with, you'd have to interdict supplies coming from Vladivostok, which would likely bring the Soviets into the war, and you'd have World War III. Tactics and stuff like that, that gets really tricky because the point of the bomb was that it was not to be used. You know, when we talk a lot about the arms gap, the nuclear gap, the missile gap in the 50s, which was fictional actually.
The bomber gap first, and then later the
but
ICBM
we talk
gap.
that it's this. You know what devastation you do to a place. If you drop a bomb on a city, you can't send in the army the next day because then those guys will all die from radiation poisoning. I will talk in War to War. I guarantee we'll be talking about nuclear operational ideas and operational thoughts. Strategically and tactically, it's a little trickier.
At the end of the day, we have to separate those things. One adapts to the other, obviously, but the reality is very close. Or it is what Indy said, and the thing that you should keep in mind is that the idea behind the nuclear weapon is a deterrent. So the strategy behind it is, at the end of the day, what emerges then out of the bomber gap and then later the missile gap, which is the idea of mutual assured destruction. And tactical nuclear arms do enter into the picture after the Korean War, though late after the Korean War. And the first time that they're a real big issue in a conflict is actually during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the idea of tactical nuclear arms almost launches nuclear Armageddon.
That was still a plan, and that the the committee was saying that wiping Cuba off the face of the earth was an acceptable trade-off.
Yeah.
You know, ex-com.
And I mean, you will get into soon. I don't want to be too much spoilers, but those of you who've already seen our Cuban Missile Crisis and perhaps the dictionary will know that when the Korean War is going on, all of these things are still very unripe. They're not thought through, and it will happen at some point that a certain general by a name, a French name.
If you think of Pepe Le Pew and think of a month of the year.
Yes, that would be the guy.
Okay.
You will see how he decides that maybe it is a good idea to nuke Korea.
Back to the Stone Age, as he says.
Yeah, that's what he says. And at that point, there are no controls of who can actually launch a nuclear
they have to
weapon.
actually physically lock the nuclear controls away from physically lock them.
So that says a lot about your original question. What was the thinking by the time of the Korean War? Well, it wasn't very ready. That's the thinking. And I mean, MacArthur already played the card.
28 targets he wanted to bomb in China in December. And of course, December 1st, this was a watershed moment in the Korean War when Harry Truman said, we haven't ruled out anything, you know, because this was when the Chinese offensive was pushing the UN forces all the way down south and threatening to drive them off the entire peninsula. Truman said, we haven't ruled out anything, including nuclear weapons. And that's before MacArthur's 28 atom bomb targets was not broadcast to the world. That was just to Truman. But Truman said that to the world. And that really changed things because that provoked such a storm of protest from every single other country in the United Nations.
And inside of the U.S. as well.
But it was really, that was when, it was after that when Truman realized that he actually had to work collectively. That the U.S., which had the first 6 months of the Korean War, acted unilaterally as commander of the UN forces, and everybody followed suit. But that was when it really became, it had to work collectively, or else it wouldn't have worked at all.
So the short and simple of it is, by the time of the Korean War, nuclear strategies, and definitely not tactics, didn't really exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Albert Jackinson asks,
These names get weirder and weirder. I love them. These
I
are
think great names
I
today.
think she's just making
absolutely.
up the questions and then he's like, what do I feel like asking? Okay.
how valid were the fears that the US's containment strategy was based on regarding communism, given it is a different ideology?
Can you take that again? I didn't quite get it.
How valid were the U.S. fears about containment? What?
How valid were the fears the US's containment strategy was based on regarding communism, given it is a different ideology?
Okay, now I understand the
Uh-huh.
question.
Okay.
Well, if you watch today's episode of War to War, you will have already heard a
What time did it
lot.
come out? It came out at like
It came
7?
out like 7 o'clock. Yeah.
Woohoo! Yeah.
If you watch that episode, you will hear several quotes or a couple of quotes by the Soviets about what their view of the world was. And if you forget the ideological part of the whole thing, and we just look at it from a geopolitical viewpoint, ideology is the basis of that geopolitical thinking. But if we just look at it as geopolitics, the idea from the Soviet Union was that war with the capitalist world was inevitable.
Right.
At this point. That's what Stalin thought. He said it numerous times.
The capitalist world thought it was likely with
Yeah.
the communist world, not inevitable, but likely.
Exactly. So, because we live in we live in the West, but the West is also a freer world, and these debates were held openly, we think of it as U.S. paranoia or Western paranoia about the Soviets. But the real paranoia wasn't coming from the West. The real, or both were paranoid, but the strong paranoia was coming from Stalin's USSR.
Yeah.
And that is what was driving the conflict. And it was not a made up, like kind of, communism bad, got to stop communism. That wasn't what it was about. What it was about was literally, these guys think that we're going to go to war very soon. And if we don't prepare for that possibility, well, then we're going to be invaded. That's basically the reality of it.
Well, domino theory started changing that in the 50s because suddenly China was suddenly a communist country. And, well, again, you have to watch the Cuba crisis for the whole explanation of all this stuff in Africa and stuff. But suddenly many places in the world were suddenly, and it was a question of wherever it rears its head, now we actually have to fight it. We actually have to, otherwise the whole world will become communist. I understand that fear. I mean, I suppose it would be hard to not share in that.
Well, we grew up during the Cold War, and I lived in two countries that were closer to the front line than you were at the time. And
what, Texas wasn't close to the front lines?
Well, Sweden and France were closer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in difference to America, we had communists amongst us, right?
Yeah, sure.
I even had family
Publicly,
members. I'm not going to hang anybody out now. You know who I'm talking about. He was a communist.
Your family member of the communists?
You know who I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
We had communism among us, and our fear here, even among communists, was not an ideological issue. It was a geopolitical force issue, because we knew, even the communists in Europe knew, that there was a real threat from the Warsaw Pact. And it was not just paranoia. It was actually, it's not paranoia if you're right. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, because just because you're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't following you.
Yeah.
Jimothy asks.
Jimothy.
Jimothy.
Your parents named you Jimothy? I hope so.
These names are great.
I know.
Fantastic.
Would you consider some more specials on the TimeGhost channel on modern African history? I know you covered the Suez crisis, so it would be great if you covered some more, as it's not usually covered.
We are going to cover a lot of, a lot, that's the wrong way of saying it. We're going to cover significant flashpoints in African history already in this first season of the Cold War. Spoilers for those of you who don't know how the Cold War and decolonization and colonial wars go. It really only takes off that part, the conflict between North and South, only really takes off in a burning, flaming way towards the end of the 50s, and then it becomes dramatic in the 60s and 70s.
And that'll be in the space race
Yeah,
show because we're
exactly.
using the space race as a
w-
metaphor. for this.
and we're already going to have the first episodes. The first ones are going to be about North Africa, which people forget often is Africa.
If people don't even think it's a country.
Oh, Indy.
Sorry, I can't help it. You know, we talk about North Africa and South Africa. You know, people don't even forget about North Africa. They forget that it even existed, man. It's
Okay.
bugs me.
Yeah. Anyway, so even in like these first few weeks of War to War, we are going to start looking at the African continent. And towards the middle of War to War, we will also be going into the Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa and looking at the emerging colonial conflict. You have to understand something. Two things about TimeGhost, and specifically about the series as well, is that we don't look at history from a continental or national perspective.
No,
We
have
looked
to.
at it from a global perspective. That means that we will, by force, focus on the places where there is conflict or development, both positive and negative. And we've often people go like, why aren't you covering this or that more? Well, because there's not much happening there right now that is significant for a global development. That said, everything is significant for global development, but I'm talking, we can't recreate reality, then you wouldn't watch us. So
No, they might.
Yeah, they might.
They might.
Yeah, it'll be difficult.
I
to
could.
recreate
I
that.
gotta. When I write the
gonna
1949
act-
episode about North Africa, the Republic of North Africa, and the strife there, the problems there in 1949. Woo, you should have seen Korea coming a million miles
Are you
away
gonna-
because of what was happening in the Republic of North Africa.
Are you going to act out all the 100 or so million people you're talking about?
Puppets. It's gonna be
Finger puppets.
No, hand puppets. Because hello, Senor Hitler. Hello, Senor. Hello, Senor Mussolini. Senor Hitler.
I only got to one of my points, right?
Okay, so you got another point. I think they like Senor Hitler and Senor Mussolini.
I believe, I'm sure they do. Who wouldn't? Yeah, that's one point. And the second point is that when we choose which conflicts that we cover, we try to also look at conflicts that have a global impact. Now, again, every conflict has global impact, that's sure, but we have to be able to tell a story that actually leads from one point to another. And therefore, it is easier to look at the African continent from the perspective of decolonization and strife during the Cold War in this case. And if you look at World War II, we covered Africa a lot. One of our coolest episodes is an episode you made about the Kenyan,
the Nigerians.
Nigerian.
Oh,
yeah.
that took a couple weeks. It took 2 weeks, man.
Yeah.
It was 17 days actually. The advance of the Nigerians.
Yeah.
That was one of the mind-blowing things. That's the fun about writing these wars. The fun. But the satisfaction is really uncovering stuff and being able to present it to a broad audience that really should have been presented to a broad audience a long, long time ago. But we do things like that.
Yep.
Joe Max asks, is Vietnam War coverage after Korea? And when is a good starting point? 1965?
If you're a Patreon member, you will find out when we publish the list of episodes for War to War. And I'm not saying anything more than that.
Okay. Sí. Senor Hitler, Senor Mussolini. Senor Hitler. The Soviets, they are invading. The Soviets, they are invading. No me gusta. No me gusta. No me gusta. There's a commercial. That's our commercial break, okay?
Are you doing
I'm gonna do a whole.
Wait
If they
minute.
write enough in, I'm gonna do a whole series. I'm gonna do World War II. I'll do it accurately. I won't have the Soviets invading and Senor Mussolini goes and talks to Senor Hitler. It'll be Senor Himmler, of course. So, but
Yeah, of course.
because it's accurate,
'Cause,
right?
yeah.
But I would do this show. I do it a little lower though, so they're more like. Okay,
Commercial break over.
that's
Now
okay.
Indy's making
And now back
commercials
to
for
now
fascists.
back to our regular content.
Jimothy is back. And
Timothy.
is asking, I was wondering if you could do a special on Ireland's involvement in the war while being neutral. As I am Irish, I would really like this. Also, you can laugh at the name I have. It's not mine.
Oh, it's cool. I like the name Timothy.
I thought it
It's
was
not
cool.
his. I
We're
know
not
it's
laughing at it. We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you. But well, okay. So
Okay, sure. My brother once said that to me once when being kids, me and my sister were picking on him once, and he said, "You guys, you're not laughing with me, you're laughing at me." And that just made us, made us laugh, obviously.
Him,
So
yeah.
much like what Jimothy probably got when that name that really isn't his.
Jimothy. It's a great possibility. We had many plans during the actual chronological coverage to go and cover the neutral nations, not just Ireland, but also Sweden.
And we did that for the Great War, of course. We did all that.
But we, I mean, I think we knew what we were getting into, but we did not know how much we knew what we were getting into when we started doing World War II. I mean, just the length of the episodes, that's all you have to look at. The amount of stuff we had to cover during these 6 years inhibited us from doing anything substantial about the neutral nations. And there is a great possibility that we'll come back to it. But at the moment, we're very much focused on the miniseries and the stuff that happens right after the war that we want, that is still very relevant to the wars. So things like the Nuremberg trials, which we cover a little bit on War to War as well, but we need to cover that on the World War II channel. And likewise, I'm really, you can say it if you like, but in March we're going to have a new big miniseries, a really interesting one, coming out on World War II.
But like I'm assuming, although I might be wrong, that you asked this because when we did the Great War, we had all those specials which were like Spain before the war, France before the, whether they were neutral nations or not. We covered the Easter Revolution, the uprising, in a special, and Ireland before the war, Sweden during the war, which was neutral. And that we did like 25 different nations during the war. We have been unable to do that for World War II, although people have asked us many, many times, just because there's too much other stuff to get to during the war, and then to cover before and leading up to the war, when we did a lot of that between two wars, although we didn't do as much as we would have liked. It would be really interesting. If we were going to do neutral nations during the war, though, Ireland would have to take a back seat to several others, particularly like Sweden and Switzerland would be more relevant to the actual war, much as Ireland might be as interesting as those.
Well, those of you who have watched Spies and Ties will see that we did cover Switzerland and Sweden for that specific reason.
Right.
So it's not a national preference or anything like that, but to fill in what Indy was saying, those two instances, and Turkey as well is another one. Those three countries right there, Switzerland, Turkey, and Sweden, were instrumental in the espionage war because of their geographic location to some degree. Also in Turkey's case, because of the size and because of its historical connections to
Tanutuva.
And Tanutuva, of course.
Of course.
But so what Indy is saying is not, oh, Ireland is less interesting or less important. It is very interesting. It's just that the impact of the neutrality of Sweden, Switzerland, and Turkey, for instance, was of not war deciding, but at least war altering importance.
For better or for worse, sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Brix asks,
Bricks.
any plans for covering the Night of the Long Knives in the Rise of Hitler series?
Whoa.
What is that? What? The Night of what?
Long Knives or something.
Do you have Long Knives in
No,
the set?
I know. God, you remember where I was talking about Oscars in the December episodes that were going to come out and stuff? Yeah, it was some new thing you hadn't heard of. Oscars,
exactly.
Right.
I've never heard of it.
Maybe it's another award, like the Oscars thing. Maybe it's a new award.
The award of the long knife.
And that makes it, but that's kind of okay. It's
little,
cooler than an Oscar. I wonder what you get it for.
Is it a good award or is it like Rotten Tomatoes?
Can I ask you a question, Bricks? If you were doing a month-by-month chronology of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler, starting in 1930 and ending who knows when, would you, for any reason whatsoever, leave out the Night of the Long Knives? I mean, you hope we're going to cover it. I mean, come on. It's like, man, you guys are doing a World War II channel? I hope you cover Germany's invasion of Poland. We'll cover such things. We will. It will be covered.
Now play nice, Indy.
Sorry. I hope that did. Sorry, Bricks. If that came across as rude, sorry. I apologize.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Karel Kasama is asking, is there coming some Korean War special episodes too?
Yep.
I'm shooting one in a couple of days. I know you guys don't like it when I do it, but I have to because we got
I
some
don't
more
mind when
guests.
you do it.
No, I'm talking about those guys out there. They have to watch it, Indy.
Yeah.
it's
No,
a
but
war. It's a
there's-
war against humanity. It's
They're
not
gonna
fun
start.
to watch.
They're gonna
but
start
it-
becoming. We'll start having monthly specials for career, or roughly monthly as we see it. There's now more stuff to really cover because now that the war's gotten going, there's more stuff to do specials about. Are these? Is it funny? There's no personal questions tonight. It's only content questions. No, or is that just you or them or whoever's feeding it? They're only because normally we get like half questions about war stuff, which is fine, or TimeGhost stuff, and half questions about us, which is also fine.
Why
I'm
do you
just
have
surprised.
to open that bottle?
I'm just surprised. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying I'm
Do you
surprised.
want
No,
personal-
no,
course.
no, no, no.
I do.
We'll
I
take,
love
We'll
them.
take any
I love them.
questions you guys
I like
feed us.
questions. I
We
like
don't.
personal
We are
questions.
not complaining about the questions. The questions are really interesting today.
I think the personal
Yeah.
question is interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Sure. I'm just saying we're not complaining. It's perfectly okay. with personal.
Rickety, rockety, So, sorry,
Was that your like
Captain
extra
Haddock.
drunk?
Captain
was
Haddock
that-
was my great uncle.
Was that your extra drunk, Captain?
Billions of blistering blue barnacles, flashy bazooks, assassins.
Somehow I feel like Tintin now. Mildly embarrassed.
You look like an old metrosexual Tintin.
Okay.
Well, Tintin was
I'll-
metrosexual
no,
before
hey,
it was cool, right? Wasn't he?
I'll own
You
that.
own that, right?
I'll own that.
You're right. But you see what I mean, right? You see what I mean?
No, I'll
I mean,
own it.
you see what I mean, right?
No, I'll own it.
So-
Yeah.
So,
Okay, Carrie Pomo asks, at what point into Truman's presidency would you say that his vision started to take hold versus the continuation of FDR's plan?
Oh, well, that's a big question.
well, in August 1945, he dropped a couple of bombs. That wasn't really part of FDR's plan, so that's a pretty big one right there. You know.
FDR didn't even know if he'd have bombs to drop.
No. Well, FDR didn't have bombs to drop. He knew
No,
he might
I
soon.
said would.
I don't know if FDR would have dropped the bomb. That's interesting. But one thing that people miss, if you look, Truman was supposed to be an also-ran. He was supposed to be the vice president. He was Midwestern. He was not supposed to. I think people really, really underestimated that very determined jawline that Harry Truman had.
And those very, very piercing spectacles.
Yes, spectacles. No, Truman was as hardcore as FDR, but in a different way. How long? I think dropping atom bombs, as they were, 2 atom bombs on Japan, pretty much put your own stamp on the conduct of the war, right there.
And your presidency.
And your presidency, yes.
Yeah.
And
world history.
and posterity.
Yeah.
Okay, Xander with a capital R asks, since you both started in medieval history, do you have a favorite or few periods in medieval history?
Sure. I mean, I what my thesis was on in university, my honors thesis had to do with the Black Death. It's really hard not to be fascinated by a short period of time when a third to half of everybody on at least 2 and maybe 3 continents died. And it's really hard not to be fascinated by some of the Mongol stuff. I think it would be morbid to say the more people die, the more I'm fascinated, but it seems like that might be the case. I would like to know, I would love to do more research when I have time into the city of Merv, which was the largest city in the world, and none of you have ever heard of it. And it was the largest city in the world less than 1,000 years ago, and was utterly devastated by the Mongols. They had, I don't remember if the number was 246. It was 200 and something that every Mongol had to kill in Merv. It didn't matter if it was a child, a soldier, an old guy, some woman, a teenager. You just had to kill that many people to depopulate the entire city. And the specific reason for that was so other cities wouldn't resist, and that worked great. It saved a lot of people in other cities.
I fall into the same period as Indy with the Black Death, but for a little bit of a different reason. The 100 Years' War has always grabbed me by the collar, and I have a continued fascination with the difficulties created by familiar ideas of inheritance coupled with natural and health catastrophe that plagued literally Europe at this time.
William McNeill wrote all the great stuff about that.
Oh yeah,
That
good
was the
stuff.
great, good stuff to read.
And so I think we fall pretty much in the same area. We did already a little bit when we did our pandemic series. We covered a little bit of that.
Yeah, we did. That's
and,
true.
and culturally, a little bit later than that, the end of the Middle Ages and beginning of the Renaissance, whenever you choose to think that happened. So we're talking 15th century is something that has always culturally fascinated me because it's a transition period that's very interesting in how humanity, not only in Europe actually, because there's also a shift in the other direction in China at that time. That really, really fascinates me.
Something that I'd actually like to know more about that, I mean, there must be books and things out there that I just haven't found or haven't read. In the far western province of China, the Urumqi or Urumqi, or however you pronounce it, my Chinese pronunciation is terrible, which was around 800, 900 AD, was not only one of the most progressive parts of the planet in terms of, you know, not being locked into a feudal or a slave serf society, but also had a lot of Europeans there. So there was a lot more exchange of ideas and exchange of goods and things like that. I would like to learn more about that. That would be very interesting.
That is very interesting.
So, I don't, but I know very little about that.
So we're past the 1 hour mark. I think we're going to take 2 or 3 more questions, and then we have to let poor Clara go home. That's the and we need to prepare for shooting for tomorrow.
Yeah, we're shooting tomorrow. We're shooting some stuff from World War to War, and we're shooting some Rise of Hitler stuff tomorrow, right?
That's right.
Anything else?
No, we're shooting those 2 things tomorrow.
Okay, and then we're going to the other studio to shoot Korea.
That's right. We're taking off into the mountains.
Into the mountains.
The Alps.
Okay, Clara, come on.
Okay. Jack Doyle asks,
Jack Doyle, Private Eye.
when you cover post-war changes, will you cover home front on social issues like racial equality in the US and creation of the welfare state and NHS in the UK?
Well, the NHS we already covered in during World War II, if we to get really specific. But the general answer is yes. The whole idea with war to war is very similar to between two wars. It's to give you a synthesis of what went on in these 10 years, well, 12 years actually, and to see how we got from one point to another, and which point that is fairly simple. How did we go from the point where we had just gotten out of the worst calamity in human history to the point of where we were capable of destroying each other with nuclear weapons and ICBMs? This is the first season of the Cold War. But we don't want to look at that from the cold, calculated viewpoint of how many bombs do you have to drop and what armies are moving where. We try to look at it from a holistic perspective, because what contributed to all of that change was just as much what was happening at home in houses and families in both the Western and the Eastern worlds. So already in the content that we're shooting tomorrow, we're talking about films, we're talking about household appliances, we're talking about stuff like that. And if you are a member of the TimeGhost Army, you will soon get the list, and you will see in that list that yes, we will cover things like the civil rights movement and social change and music, arts, everything.
Here's a question from Kantemirovskaya.
Kantemirovskaya, Private Eye. Sorry, they're all private eyes.
They ask, okay, here's one for Indy.
Okay.
When are you playing live next and where?
I have 3. Let's see, I get back to Stockholm on Wednesday. That's the 5th. I've shows the 6th, the 13th, and the 15th. And that's 3 different musical things. On the 6th, a place called Reimers Hotel in Stockholm. Reimers Home is a really nice place to play.
Very nice hotel.
Yeah, but it's a nice place to play. They have the sound, the PA system is way too good for that place. It only holds maybe 140, 150 people. Me and a couple of friends put together. This is more of a side project than anything. It's like a okay, in the early 80s, when people think of a synth band, they think of lots of synths and electronic drums. But when synth bands first started, when you got them in the early 80s, when you thought of like Flock of Seagulls or Gary Newman and stuff, you had maybe one or max two synths, but you had guitar, bass, and drums, analog instruments and stuff. This Diamond Ring, which is the name of that band, is one synth, one guitar, one bass, one drums. So that's what's playing next Thursday evening at Reimer's Hotel. I have a show with the Madman Band, which is sort of an early 60s wall of harmony thing, on the 13th. And on the 15th, I have a really fun solo show. Now, I do a solo one-man band thing called the Organ Slayer. And there's a place that in Stockholm for like 30 years has always been like a real dive where all the local punk bands and all the local, teenage crappy bands play a few times. But it's just been recently bought by guys that used to run a lot of the cool indie clubs the last 20 years or so. And they're still not raising the beer prices, although they've changed the food menu. And now they're sort of changing the music a little bit because that part of town has changed a little bit. It's called Snow White on Ringvägen in Stockholm. And that's on the 15th. That's the show you should go to if you're in Stockholm. That's going to be a really good show. That's just me. That's just one guy, one instrument, but plays all the music.
And it's fun.
It's fun.
It's really fun.
You haven't seen it in 20 years, man.
No, but I mean, it was good 20 years ago, so it's
There
not,
you go.
it won't have gotten
So-
worse.
No, that's true. Well, you never know. Sometimes you see like old favorite artists of yours from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, and you're like, man, shouldn't have come tonight.
True.
So
Yeah, but I have faith in you, Indy,
I have
even
faith
at
in you
your
too.
old age.
You gotta have faith,
Yeah.
as George Michael once said.
Oh, God. The philosopher, George
The
Michael.
famous yes. Was it Socrates or was it George Michael who said, "I guess I gotta have faith." Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Kisha asks, would you consider a special of all the indigenous people's contributions serving the wars despite not receiving equal treatment?
To serve which war are we talking about? Any war or what?
Any war.
Well, I mean, for World War II, that has been a consideration. We did a little bit on the First Nation, Canadian First Nation servicemen during the D-Day.
And Mark Steinbergen had his memorial.
Yeah,
for
and
that.
it has a memorial for that, and we covered that a little bit. The answer is a very interesting topic that we will most certainly visit one day on World War II for that conflict. We're not going to go back to the Great War, I think, and do
No.
that. So,
But we did a bunch of that stuff during the Great War.
when we get into Korea and stuff like that, well, things start getting complicated because now it starts getting woven into the civil rights movement and to changes in how racism works. So the answer is yes, it's a topic that we will definitely touch upon.
You do get more and more mixed battalions, like the French battalion that France has its handfuls in Indochina in 1950-51, but they still send one battalion to Korea, and it's volunteers, but it's it's two rifle. I mean, sorry, it's the French. It's two rifle companies basically, but it's a lot of Algerians. There's a lot of hardcore fighters and stuff, and there's not so much friction around there as far as I know. So.
No, it starts to change in the 50s. It doesn't. I mean, Vietnam War has issues as well with that. So, but I think you were speaking specifically about indigenous servicemen and servicewomen, and for World War II, we will definitely. I mean, there's like things. There's a lot going on in the Pacific with the Apache that serve there, and
Sure.
we would love to, or we would love to do that. But again, it goes back to the same answer as to the neutrality issue. During the war, we were swamped, and right now, we're focused on a little bit, I would say, finding our footing, how the World War II channel is going to develop.
Yeah.
And Indy and James, who is the editorial lead for that channel, and me will have a talk about this actually in the next couple of days.
Yeah,
and
we
we're
have
gonna see.
ideas for the next couple of months, but we might want to pursue a slightly different direction after that, while still doing the TimeGhost stuff, which is definitely chronology based more than place or person or battle based. Obviously,
Yeah,
that's
right.
So
This is the last question.
last question,
From Green Sammy 87.
Private Eye.
And he asks, which war movie or series do you like best for its authenticity?
Well, we already talked about authenticity. I mean, in terms of World War II authenticity, you can't beat Tora.
Impossible.
You can't beat Tora.
I mean, we are both, we've actually done original research into Pearl Harbor. We're not just reporters on what other historians have done. We've done we went back and did the actual historical research for the whole Pearl Harbor thing. And it was, and I saw Tora already shortly
came out
after
in 1970,
Yeah, shortly after it came out, like 5 years after that, because my parents weren't able to stop me from watching war content when I was 7 years old because I was adamant about it. But I watched it back then, and I watched it again sometime in the 80s. But then I hadn't watched it in a long time, and we watched it together, right? When we had finished writing, we just finished writing Pearl Harbor. We're like, wow, they even have the brand.
Everything.
They even have the brand of the car they're driving, right?
And they got even like tiny little details. They're like, yep, like that Tora.
So from a point of from the point of view of accuracy, definitely without a doubt. From the point of artistic rendering of a war,
Wonder Woman.
Yes, Wonder Woman, of course. Ludendorff dies. That's
Wonder Woman kills Ludendorff. I mean, she kills the quartermaster general of the German army. And when people used to
like 5 years after he died.
Yeah, 5 years after he died, and people would write in, and forgetting he didn't even have. He had. This was before he did the Ludendorff Hitler push, the beer hall push.
Oh yeah, right.
Ludendorff was involved in that. Yeah. Wonder Woman already killed him, and people write in, don't you think? I'm like, it's a movie. Wonder Woman can kill Hitler. I don't care. It's a movie. It's not a documentary.
I continue to be
Pearl Harbor, the movie. That's it's the opposite of Tora.
Okay, forget accuracy then, because it's not very accurate, but it is a visceral rendition of war, of a specific war, and that's Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is definitely a movie where I go like, that's...
I like watching The Pacific and Band of Brothers and stuff.
Yeah, Band of Brothers, I mean, I know that many of you out there are going to go, you're not saying the Band of Brothers is good because of the focus on the
it's good because it's good.
But it is really good storytelling, and trust us, from the viewpoint of folks who have followed what E Company and many others did, it's accurate enough. Because it really gives you the visceral feeling of what was going on. Yes, I know D Company and A Company and B Company did great stuff as well. We talked
about them, sure.
And it's fantastic. But and maybe it's unfair, but when Tom Hanks and Spielberg produced Band of Brothers, and for that matter, when it was written, the idea was to try to give a personal view. And you can't give a personal view if you're trying to tell the story of all of the 101st Airborne or the U.S. Army. That's not going to be a personal view. That's what Indy and I do, right?
That's true.
We give you that. So, if you want to understand what happened from an individual viewpoint, then Band of Brothers and the Pacific are really, really, really good.
Pacific, I think, underrated by people too.
Yeah, I thought it was really difficult to watch the first time because
it doesn't grab you the way Band of Brothers
does.
but
because of and it's very much the nature of the war. The nature of the war is that it doesn't advance; it just keeps on going in loops.
It also much more than most other war things. It expects you to actually know much of the Pacific War.
It does.
You actually have to know a fair amount, at least a little bit, to understand what's going on.
Even when I watched it the first time, it was way before we did World War II. I knew a lot about the Pacific theater, but it was the drudgery of war. This whole circular movement of one island and it starts all over again, another island and it starts all over again, and you don't see any goal. And in Band of Brothers, you see that goal because you're following the 101st, how they start in America and end up in Berchtesgaden, or actually in Selamsee. But so there's a progression of story there. There's a dramaturgy that really grabs you, and it doesn't with the Pacific. But when I went back and watched it quite recently, actually, that's exactly what I appreciated.
Yeah,
because going back to what I said about Apocalypse Now and giving a real visceral feeling of how was it to be there. Well, you got a real feeling of the hopelessness of being in the Pacific War, right? It's just, and how it doesn't matter what you do. I'm effed.
In the December 1930 episode of Rise of Hitler, which comes out sometime in February or early March. It talks about All Quiet on the Western Front and its reception when it comes out in 1930 in Germany. No spoilers, but I really enjoyed the original All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh yeah, so do
I think
and
that's
it's,
really,
and it's a cinematography from the viewpoint of cinematography. It had a huge impact on our art at the end of the day.
it
when
won
it
Best
came out.
Director and Best Film at the 3rd Oscars.
Yeah, and it's really hard to get a copy of it that's in the right way. First of all, parts of it have been damaged. and
The
stuff.
French, the Germans,
But-
and the British all cut out several, so you really
Yeah.
want the American
So-
original if you want the whole thing.
And the cool bit about that, among other things, is the colorization. So the colorization theme, which you won't see in most copies because they're going to be just black and white all the way through,
Yeah.
but is that it uses color to depict the different sides. So every time the Germans are shown in battle or in the trenches, it's green. Every time the British are shown, it's red. And it goes on like that. And then tones of these colors were used in order to enhance the drama in the action scenes.
This is really cool.
And when you see it with the correct colorization on it, it's even for a movie that is now almost 100 years old.
95 years this
Yeah,
year.
it's
95
almost
years old.
100 years old. Even that long afterwards, if you just kind of try to get out of your modern premonitions or preconceptions of what a movie should look like, it's still enjoyable.
Yeah.
Enjoyable is the wrong word. Still fascinating.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
So we could go on. There's a lot of war movies.
We could go on forever talking as well with you guys, but we do have to go now. And thank you for those of you who watch live right now, and for anybody who's watching this after the fact. Thank you as well.
Okay. And big thank you from me, Indy Neidell, and from Signor Mussolini. Thank you very much. And Signor Hitler. Signor Hitler. Signor Hitler here. I say thank you very
indeed.
much. Okay, thank you very much as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to also thank Tom and Jake, who are behind the screens and far away in the fair islands of the United Kingdom.
We're going to thank Clara too,
And
right?
yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
Okay, okay.
And thank you, Clara. Well, I thought I might not, but now that you reminded me, Indy,
Okay.
I was going to skip it. But
Might as well
hey,
thank Astrid for
well, no, and a huge thanks to Clara, who is now here way over her time of the day.
Okay.
And yeah, it's been a pleasure.
All right, so well, that's from TimeGhost signing off.
Excelsior!
This is when you turn it off. Otherwise, you get bloopers.
Jake was supposed to turn it off, so I don't have to go.
Okay.
Is it off now?
I have no
No,
idea.
I think we're running.
Fuck them, no.
Uh,